And welcome to another edition of College Football Summer School here on Football.com's Google Plus page. My name is Aaron Morse, joined this week one-on-one with Matt Phifer. Last week was one-on-one Morse and Jenkins. This week, one-on-one Morse and Phifer. Matt, how is everything today?
Things are good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to the start of college football season. Fall camps have begun, but let's talk off-the-field issues. An O'Bannon case, great news for the athletes. They won. The NCAA looking for some clarifications right now, as you saw a couple articles this week about the ruling in terms of when it will start. But the athletes, their likenesses, it's looking good for them. What are your thoughts on the O'Bannon case and what's going to happen going forward now?
It looks very good for the athletes. They're going to be able to make money and at least get something for all those jersey sales, for being used in video games, for the use of their likenesses. It's a huge win for the athletes, and so it was. It really changes just college sports in general. It gets rid of that whole idea of amateurism, really is put aside, at least in the case of big-time college football and college basketball. And, I mean, having 20, maybe even if you have one of these odd 5-year things, $25,000 when you're walking away from college, I mean, I think you and I could agree that's a big help.
Yeah, I think it will be. And in terms of the NCAA, I mean, they also made a separate decision. I mean, it's probably related to the O'Bannon case, but it was separate, on the surface, where now the Power 5 conferences can make some of their own rules in regards to what athletes can receive and whatnot. Why do you think the NCAA decided to do that, first of all? And second of all, do you think it was a good decision on their part?
I think they did it because the reality is that I think deep down the NCAA knew that this Ed O'Bannon case was going to be going against them. So it's just better to allow the schools to do it and look like you were along with it, because in 20 and 30 years, when the history books are written on this, then it'll look like, well, you were complicit and you helped out the athletes in the long run. But I'll be honest, I don't even think the NCAA may exist in 30 years. I think this is kind of the beginning of the end of the NCAA. I really do think that Power 5 conferences are eventually going to split away and start their own association, mostly play amongst each other, maybe exclusively amongst each other. But I think it is a good thing, really, for those 5 power conferences, because for those schools who play big time, the big time college football and the big college basketball, their needs are entirely different than most of the schools. And there's 350 Division I schools. The idea that some of these smaller schools, whether that don't play football or might only play 1AA, have the same vote as a Penn State or a Texas or a Florida State is pretty crazy, because you can't compare being on like the local TV station and being on ESPN every week.
Yeah, and I wonder, we're seeing this dominoes fall in football, but of course the NCAA, a much larger institution beyond football, so you got to wonder, I mean, even though we're focused on football, I'm just thinking to myself, what about all the other sports? We don't know. It's a brave new world we're headed into, but I think it will be good for the athletes. I agree with you, and it will be interesting to see if the power conferences do break off, because nowadays the power conferences love playing the small schools. Alabama can't wait to say, Chattanooga, come on in. We'll pay you some money, but maybe in the future those games won't exist, but it might make more entertaining, if not a little bit more professional type football, perhaps.
Well, let me throw it out there. With the college football playoff, does Alabama want to play Tennessee Chattanooga anymore? Yeah, I mean, that's a legitimate question, because that only hurts you in that whole idea of having the strength of schedule. You're already seeing the Big Ten starting next year. They're not going to be playing FCS schools anymore, stuff like that. So I really do think those dominoes are falling too. You're not going to see as many of those weaker opponents scheduled.
All right, well, speaking of on the field, let's look on the field real quickly for our final topic here. And this is a question I was wondering about, because, there's a lot of players in college football. That guy's getting a lot of hype in all the preseason magazines. But who's one player out there, Matt, that you've been looking at? I know I saw you reading that Phil Steele magazine earlier, so you've been doing your research. But who's one player out there that isn't getting the publicity he should be getting going into 2014?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say Miles Jack, the linebacker/running back for UCLA. First of all, how many players do we see anymore that play two ways? in big-time college football. How great is that? Just on its own. But he had over 260 rushing yards last year and 7 touchdowns. Oh, and by the way, had 75 tackles and a sack, 6 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions. He's going to be a key to UCLA on both sides of the ball this year. And I think UCLA is the kind of team that could win the Pac-12 South and win the Pac-12 in general. And Miles Jack will be a big part of that. And frankly, everybody's talking about Jameis and various other players, but they're not talking about him, and I think he's going to be a big part out there at UCLA.
Well, yeah, when people talk about UCLA, I should say, so they're really talking about Hundley, the quarterback. I mean, he had that big feature the other day, on Sports Illustrated. They're not talking about other guys on that team. They're always focused on the quarterback. So we'll see how big of an impact Miles Jack is. I heard about him last year. He did well last year. Maybe even this year, maybe even further. So Matt Phifer, thanks so much for joining us here on College Football Summer School. We're less than a month away from opening kickoff. Just a few weeks now. It should be a lot of fun. For Football.com, I'm Aaron Morse. Thanks for tuning in.